Isabel, my nemesis in love, posted on social media. 2 photos accompanied her smug pronouncement. The first was a screenshot of a WeChat conversation, my desperate, pleading messages to Julian after our breakup, begging him to come back. It was a long, rambling testament of self-abasement, each word, each punctuation mark a tiny piece of my dignity trampled underfoot. The second photo was of Julian, head bowed, carefully peeling shrimp for her. Her caption dripped with saccharine triumph, ha ha ha, and this is the man some other girl pines for. A sickeningly proud emoji punctuated her digital gloating. My world imploded in that instant. Not with rage, not with renewed heartbreak, but with something far more profound and unsettling. I suddenly realized I was no longer in love with him. The sensation was bizarre, almost clinical. This man, who had been the sun and moon of my existence, the constant presence in my life, now evoked absolutely nothing. The little gestures that once sent butterflies fluttering in my stomach now left me utterly unmoved. Looking at him was like looking at any random face in a crowd, a stranger, utterly unremarkable. But I betrayed none of this. I continued the charade of devoted girlfriend. At just past 7, breakfast was laid out on the dining table. A glass of lukewarm water, perfectly tempered, sat on his nightstand. His toothbrush, pre-pasted, awaited him in the bathroom. Before leaving, I used the remote to nudge the aggressively low air conditioning up a degree, then paused at the bedroom door. "I'm heading to work," I announced. He was a vague shape burrowed deep under the crisp white duvet, his muffled barely audible. I turned and walked away. A demanding new project had consumed my team recently, leaving us all reeling in a whirlwind of deadlines and details. I glanced at the clock as I finalized the preliminary details, almost 1 in the morning. It struck me then, with a jolt, that I hadn't thought of him even once all day. This was abnormal. I remembered my first job after graduation, working with a senior colleague on events. It was the same relentless pace, late nights becoming the norm. Yet, every hour, I'd send Julian updates, little digital breadcrumbs of my day. If it was past 6, I'd preemptively message him, estimating my late finish, telling him not to wait up. Even as our relationship deepened, this habit of checking in, of keeping him informed, persisted. But today? Silence. A quick glance at WeChat revealed a message from him, time-stamped just after 7, asking when I'd be home. I hadn't even registered it. My usual response time to him was never longer than 3 minutes. I turned the phone over in my hand, the cool glass smooth against my palm. Hesitation flickered, then died. I didn't reply. Stepping out of the office building, I saw him, leaning against his gleaming black G-Wagon, a silhouette of lean strength against the dim streetlights. Head bent over his phone, the crimson tip of a cigarette flared and faded in the darkness. He'd started smoking again. I loathed his smoking. His father had succumbed to liver cancer. Early in our relationship, I'd been relentless, nagging him to quit. He'd just raise an eyebrow, a wry, amused twist to his lips, and light up another. I couldn't control him. I knew that then, and I knew it now. In love, the one who loves more is always the more vulnerable. Our relationship had been off-kilter from the start. I had placed myself on a lower plane, and in doing so, forfeited any real influence. I approached slowly. He was lost in thought, so deeply engrossed he hadn't noticed me. Even as I stood before him, he remained oblivious. "Julian?" I asked softly, my voice gentle. "What are you doing here?" He snapped to attention, startled. A flicker of something like panic crossed his face as he snatched the cigarette from his lips and ground it under his heel. Only then did I see the littered pavement, a small graveyard of extinguished butts. How many had he smoked? The automatic urge to chide him, to plead with him to smoke less, rose in my throat, but died unspoken. I realized with a sinking heart, I simply didn't care anymore. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze searching, as if waiting for a cue. A fleeting emotion, something like longing, flickered in his eyes, then was extinguished, leaving only a dull, shadowed weariness. The smoke had roughened his voice, making it husky. "I came to pick you up," he said. A pause, then, almost defensively, "You didn't reply to my message." I feigned a glance at my phone, a pantomime of belated awareness. "Oh, sorry. Too busy, didn't see it." He said nothing, simply opened the car door for me. This unexpected courtesy was jarring. For Julian, I was a given, a constant. Easily won, loved too readily, I was the bedrock of his certainty. His unwavering assumption was that I would always be there, unmoving, unyielding. Summoned at will, dismissed just as easily. These late-night pickups, once a rare expression of guilt or fleeting tenderness, had long ceased to be. Inside the car, I leaned against the cool leather, watching the blur of city lights streak past. Silence settled, thick and heavy. Memories flickered, of earlier days, of his inherent reserve. In the past, during our quiet moments, I would be the one to chatter, to fill the void with conversation, desperate to draw him out. He'd respond in monosyllables, curt acknowledgments. Now, the effort felt insurmountable. After a protracted silence, he finally asked, "Have you eaten?" "Yes," I replied, offering no reciprocal question. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, he was gently shaking my shoulder. I blinked awake to find him frowning down at me, concern etched on his features. "You're exhausted, aren't you?" he murmured. "Take a break, Sarah. This job. It's not worth killing yourself. Let me take care of you." I remained silent, studying his face. There was a time when I would have been the one to utter those words. Back when his business was gaining traction, when I was drowning in work, battling corporate politics, bone-weary, and soul-tired. Coming home late one night, I'd clung to him, burying my face in his chest, half joking, half pleading, "Let me quit, Julian. Give you a chance to spoil me." He'd just chuckle, deflect, pat my head dismissively. "Keep going, Sarah. You've got this." I'd never voiced such foolish longings again. Now, hearing the words from him, I simply raised my gaze, met his eyes, and offered a small, non-committal smile. Silence, mirroring his past responses. I had loved him with a fierce, almost reckless abandon. My friends had watched, aghast, a chorus of concerned warnings. "Sarah, don't fall too hard." But I was a moth drawn to a flame. From the moment our eyes first met, I knew I was doomed. I met Julian during my sophomore year of university. Before that, he was just a name, a legend. The quintessential campus heartthrob, effortlessly cool, devastatingly handsome, with a reputation for casual dalliances. His list of ex-girlfriends was rumored to be longer than the university library's catalog. How I managed to become the one to ascend to the throne of his official girlfriend remained a mystery, a capricious twist of fate. I could only attribute it to timing. Fate had placed me in his path during a particularly turbulent period of his life. Fate had, for a brief window, tamed his restless spirit. Fate had ensured that, in that specific moment, no other woman quite like me, quite so willing to tolerate his flaws, quite so steadfast in her devotion, had crossed his horizon. And so, I became his girlfriend. A relationship that would stretch on for 7 tumultuous, on-again off-again years, baffling everyone who knew us. As one of his friends bluntly put it, "You two are from completely different planets." I was driven, goal-oriented, meticulously planning every step of my life. He was the opposite, drifting, uncommitted, living entirely in the moment. Nothing seemed to truly capture his attention, to ignite any real passion. He flitted through life, collecting fleeting affections like wildflowers, admired briefly, then discarded. Except, perhaps, for one. When I met Julian, he had just ended a significant relationship. Even 7 years into my own with him, the name Isabel still had the power to make me bristle, to trigger a deep-seated insecurity. She was, I suspected, the one girl he had truly loved, the one who had genuinely captured his heart. My first glimpse of Julian was at a club fair. He was leaning against the doorframe of the photography club booth, head bent over his phone, his profile sharp and arresting. I couldn't help but steal a second glance. A sophomore girl beside me sighed, half envious, half admiring. That's Julian. Probably waiting for his girlfriend. I followed her gaze to a tall, slender figure with cascading curls, her back to us. Her face was hidden, but even from behind, she radiated a certain captivating allure. Our second encounter was under far less romantic circumstances, a torrential downpour in the dead of night off campus. I was returning from Beijing after a grueling inter-university competition, exhausted and travel-weary. A taxi dropped me off at the university gates, and I sprinted through the deluge, desperate to reach the shelter of my dorm. That's when I saw him. Initially, I didn't recognize him. A dark, huddled shape slumped against the wall near the entrance. Hesitantly, I approached, switching on my phone's flashlight. It was him. Unconscious. Propped against the brick, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. The usual arrogance, the careless charm, was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that was strangely compelling. Perhaps it was foolishness, perhaps a reckless impulse, but any hesitation I might have felt vanished. I hailed another taxi and took him to the hospital. He'd been dangerously drunk, the alcohol compounded by the sudden downpour, triggering a high fever. Later, I'd often tease him, claiming I'd saved his life. Whether I had or not, I couldn't say. But I knew I was about to risk my own. I stayed by his bedside until he woke. His eyes were hazy, unfocused. I smiled, standing by the bed. "Hi, Julian. I'm Serafina." The hospital. Bill was 2,456 yuan. Taxi fare was 147. "Can I get your WeChat to send you the total?" Recognition flickered in his eyes. He narrowed them slightly, a slow smile spreading across his face. The familiar, nonchalant charm was back, instantly captivating, sending my heart into overdrive. He was hospitalized for a week. Every day, I brought him chicken soup, a ritual that extended until his discharge. On that final day, he finally remembered my name. He leaned against the hospital doorframe, a lazy grin playing on his lips. "So," he drawled, "are you hitting on me?" Sunlight streamed through the small window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I feigned composure, mirroring his playful tone. "Took you long enough to notice." I pursued him for 6 months and 3 days. On the 4th day of the 6th month, Christmas Day, we were having dinner at a small restaurant off campus. I was meticulously peeling shrimp for him when I heard him say, "Serafina, let's be together." My hand, poised with a shrimp, froze. A long, suspended moment. Then, without looking up, I continued peeling, my voice soft, almost hesitant. "Okay." Such an understated, almost anticlimactic beginning. No declarations of love, no grand pronouncements of affection. Just a casual suggestion, "Let's be together," and I, fool that I was, rushed headlong into the inferno. But in that moment, there was a strange, fragile happiness. Happy enough to hail a taxi alone after dinner and spend an hour in the sterile chill of a hospital, hooked up to an 4-drip. Because, of course, I was allergic to shellfish. And yet, it was a joy, pure and unadulterated. Sheer, blissful folly. I woke up the next morning at 8, unusually late. The exhaustion from the previous day must have finally caught up with me. I lay rigidly on my back, staring at the ceiling. Even under the duvet, I felt a persistent chill. Julian ran perpetually hot. The apartment's thermostat was always set to Arctic levels. When we first moved in together, I'd been constantly cold, jolting. Awake in the middle of the night, teeth chattering. I'd instinctively burrow into him, seeking warmth, limbs tangling, clinging to him like a human furnace. Initially, he'd been irritated, unused to such clingy sleep habits. Every time I'd inch closer, he'd push me away, a muttered protest escaping his lips. But I was a creature of habit, warmth seeking in my sleep. I'd drift back, unconsciously seeking his body heat. Night after night, the cycle repeated, until, eventually, he simply resigned himself to it. But lately, something had shifted. It had been, I realized with a start, 4 or 5 months since the last time I'd woken up nestled in his arms. Every night, when the cold seeped into my bones, I'd curl into myself, a tight, self-contained ball. Even with him right beside me, the faint radiating warmth a tangible presence, even in the hazy twilight of sleep, I hadn't sought him out. Not in months. A chilling premonition, a subtle, creeping unease. Today, unusually, he was already awake. Barefoot, he moved silently across the carpet, a wraith in the pre-dawn light. I watched him slip onto the balcony, a lit cigarette held loosely between his fingers. Even from here, I could see the frow of his brow, the tight set of his jaw. Something troubled him. His face, still undeniably handsome, held a weariness I hadn't noticed before. I studied him intently for a long moment, and found my heart remained disconcertingly calm, utterly unmoved. He must have sensed my gaze. He turned, cigarette still clamped between his teeth, and our eyes met through the glass. A silent standoff, a silent question hanging in the air between us, despite the physical distance. He held my gaze until the ash on his cigarette lengthened precariously, then he finally flicked it into the ashtray. He re-entered the apartment as the smoke dissipated. "You should really cut back," I said, the words automatic, devoid of genuine concern. He was silent for a long moment. Then a low, almost inaudible mm in response. By the time I emerged from the bathroom, teeth brushed, he'd already returned with breakfast. Steaming paper bags from the Bowsy shop a few blocks away, the one he always insisted had the best dumplings. It used to be my daily ritual to fetch them for him. "What fillings?" I asked, my voice flat. "2 crab roe, 2 lobster," he replied, reciting my usual order for him. I picked up a dumpling, then silently placed it back in the bag. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, a silent question in the raised arch of his brow. The sudden, overwhelming weariness washed over me again. "I'm allergic to shellfish," I said, the excuse flimsy, almost pathetic. The allergy had lessened over the years, a strange, acquired tolerance, perhaps built up from years of peeling shrimp and crab for him. For years I had endured it, a minor discomfort willingly borne. But now, suddenly, the things I had once tolerated, even cherished, felt unbearable. He continued to watch me, his gaze unwavering, intense. There was a time when such focused attention from him would have sent a thrill through me. I would have instinctively reached out, winding my arms around his neck, pulling him into a kiss. He shifted slightly, his hand rising, hovering, as if intending to brush a stray strand of hair from my face or cup my cheek. But my body reacted before my conscious mind could intervene. I flinched back, a small, involuntary step away, avoiding his touch. His hand froze, suspended in midair, a gesture of unspoken affection abruptly rejected. I saw him turn his head sharply, inhale deeply, a controlled breath. When he turned back, his expression was carefully neutral, composed. "What kind do you want then?" he asked, his voice even. "I'll go back down and get you something else." We were both clinging to the illusion of normalcy, maintaining a fragile facade of peace. "It's fine," I said, my voice toneless. "I'll just scramble some eggs." He didn't reply. I saw his hand, still hanging loosely at his side, clench into a fist. Julian was not a man of infinite patience. I'd witnessed his temper flare before. In college, when a drunk harassed me, he'd nearly beaten the man to a pulp, a brawl that resulted in hefty medical bills and a stern warning from the university. Later, in the early days of his startup, he'd learned to swallow his pride, to navigate the treacherous waters of business with forced politeness. But as his success grew, so did his assertiveness. Few dared to cross him. Most people learned to defer, to placate. And yet, now, on the verge of what I expected to be an outburst, a torrent of frustrated anger, he simply smiled, a strained, brittle smile. "Okay," he said softly. "Let's go shopping later. It's almost fall. We need to refresh the wardrobe." To be honest, in that moment, as he swallowed his anger, as he chose to placate rather than confront, I felt a flicker of disappointment. 7 years together. We knew each other's moods, each other's triggers, each other's silent language. He must have sensed the shift in me, the growing detachment, the chilling indifference. Part of me longed for him to explode, to finally confront the elephant in the room, to grab me by the shoulders, to demand, "What's wrong with you, Sarah? Just tell me." And then I could finally say it. The words that were now a cold, hard truth in my heart. "I don't love you anymore. Let's end this." But he didn't ask. And so I didn't say it. We went to the supermarket that afternoon. I had always found a strange, quiet joy in grocery shopping, especially with him. Pushing a cart together, selecting household items, it felt like a glimpse into a shared, domestic future, a mundane, comforting ritual of ordinary coupledom. In the early days, I could have spent hours wandering the aisles with him, lost in a bubble of shared domesticity. Every few steps, I'd pepper him with questions, bubbling with enthusiasm. "Does this look good? Isn't this cute for the kitchen? Oh, look, matching toothbrush holders. Let's get them, they're adorable. This would look perfect in the entryway." Eventually, he'd reach his limit, a weary sigh, a muttered, "Just be quiet for 5 minutes, please," his playful exasperation a familiar, almost endearing sound. My joy in his presence had been boundless, overflowing. Everything felt heightened, vibrant when he was near. Sharing these small Domestic moments, these ordinary tasks, felt like a privilege, a secret language of love. Even breathing felt easier, lighter, beside him. To the outside world, I was perceived as cool, collected, sophisticated. But with him, I was a different person entirely, effervescent, unguarded, utterly, irrevocably smitten. But today, after barely half an hour, I glanced at the nearly empty cart, realizing we'd exchanged perhaps a dozen words, gathered. Only the barest essentials. Okay, I said abruptly, my voice devoid of any inflection. I think we're done here. Let's go home. He was silent on the drive back. As we neared the apartment, he finally spoke, his voice low, tentative. You've been working too hard lately. Why don't you take some time off after this project? Let's go to Morocco. You've always wanted to go, haven't you? He paused, then added, almost pleadingly, and I wasn't joking about you quitting your job, Sarah. I meant it. Let me take care of you. A strange tightness constricted my chest. Julian, the man who recoiled from commitment, who shunned responsibility, who had always seemed wary of emotional entanglement, was now offering this. He had once been hesitant to commit to my feelings. Now, he was offering to commit to my life. Once, hearing those words, I would have dissolved into grateful tears, overwhelmed by a surge of love and relief. But now, nothing. A flicker of surprise, a brief, almost clinical curiosity. Then, a polite, detached refusal. No, thank you. I like my job. The rejection hung in the air, blunt, almost cruel, especially considering how rarely I had ever denied him anything. Somewhere along the way, the power dynamic had subtly, irrevocably shifted. Now, it was I who was detached, indifferent, preoccupied. And he who was seeking reassurance, making overtures, desperately trying to bridge the widening chasm between us. I saw him inhale sharply, a visible intake of breath. He was not a patient man. But he paused, composing himself. Then, his voice soft, almost pleading, he tried again. Okay, then. What about Morocco? Just a vacation after this project is over. Let's just get away for a while. I offered a cool, distant smile, a carefully calibrated expression of polite dismissal. I've already been to Morocco, Julian. My voice was quiet, but firm. For years ago, I went alone. We'd had a monumental breakup before. In fact, our 7 years together were a tapestry woven with threads of breakups and reconciliations. But the one 4 years prior, that was the true cataclysm, the one that truly earned the title of breakup. That particular separation was brutal, leaving a scorched earth in its wake. It felt as though all my hopes, all my zeal for life, had been utterly consumed. There were days I genuinely doubted I could endure it. For years ago, I was just starting my career, a period of relentless pressure and exhaustion. Consumed by the demands of work, I became less attentive, less willing to constantly cater to Julian's needs and whims. Unsurprisingly, I was oblivious to the subtle shifts in his behavior, the early tremors of the impending earthquake. He started smoking more, the intervals between cigarettes shrinking. He'd drift into longer silences, lost in some private reverie. He'd come home later and later, the apartment often empty when I finally dragged myself back from the office. The realization dawned on me one evening as I stumbled home late yet again. I pushed open the door to find the apartment ablaze with light, Julian a solitary figure on the living room sofa. The balcony doors were firmly shut, trapping a thick haze of cigarette smoke that stung my eyes and throat. Ashtrays overflowed with extinguished butts, monuments to his escalating anxiety. He was slumped against the cushions, the harsh glare of the crystal chandelier overhead revealing every nuance of his expression, or rather, the utter lack of it. He was a mask of indifference as he uttered the words that would shatter my world. We should break up. He sighed deeply, a weary exhalation of resignation. Then, the casual, almost offhand addendum, Isabel is back. I don't want to dredge up the memory of that freefall, the sickening lurch of my world tilting on its axis. I had always prided myself on being independent, emotionally detached. I'd even scoffed at friends who became entangled in romantic dramas, who allowed themselves to be consumed by heartache. Love, I believed, was reciprocal, a balanced equation. Unilateral affection was pointless, a drain on dignity. In short, I believed in surviving without love, but never without self-respect. Yet, in the aftermath of Julian's pronouncement, I morphed into the very caricature I had once scorned. It felt like a brutal, visceral excision, my heart ripped from my chest, leaving a gaping, bleeding void. Within a week, I'd shed pounds, my reflection in the mirror a gaunt stranger. I bombarded him with desperate, pleading messages, each one a fresh wave of self-humiliation, each one swallowed by the digital silence. Finally, a friend, Maya, witnessing my agonizing descent, snapped. She slapped me, hard, a jolt that momentarily cleared the fog of despair. Her voice was raw with frustration. "Serafina, have you lost all self-respect? Forget him. Start over. He's probably out there living his best life, carefree and happy. Why aren't you trying to find your own happiness?" The dam of my carefully constructed composure crumbled. Tears, held back for days, years perhaps, finally erupted, hot and scalding. Through choked sobs, I whispered, each word laced with a despair that felt terminal. "I don't know if he's happy, Maya. But I know I'll never be happy again. The only way I can even imagine feeling joy again," I continued, my voice trembling, "is to rewind, to go back to when he was mine, when he was here. I don't even care if he loves me. Just, if he's here, beside me. That's all it would take." Such a pathetic confession. Such utter lack of pride. Maya stared at me, her own eyes softening with a painful understanding. She turned away, blinking rapidly. It took over 5 months before I could even feign a semblance of normalcy. My friends, bless their well-meaning hearts, seemed to believe I had moved on, had recovered. But I was living a subterranean existence, a creature of the shadows, a digital voyeur, obsessively tracking their every online move. Their meticulously curated social media feeds became my torment. Vacations in sun-drenched locales, cozy holiday snapshots, grand, orchestrated surprises splashed across Instagram stories. Sweet, saccharine videos of them laughing together, their faces flushed with happiness. Julian and I, in the first 3 years of our relationship, hadn't even managed a single, casual photo together. He disliked smiling in photos, even in the ones with Isabel, his expression remained subtly guarded. But there was a softness in those images, a tenderness that was achingly absent in our own history. In those pictures of Julian and Isabel, he wasn't the detached, vaguely dismissive man I knew. He was looking down at her, a gentle curve to his lips, his eyes softened with what could almost be mistaken for affection. A tenderness I had never experienced. The truly devastating blow came with a social media post from Isabel. The Weibo update, the casual cruelty, the public spectacle of my humiliation. 2 photos, the screenshot of my desperate WeChat please, my digitally rendered self-abasement laid bare for public consumption, alongside a photo of Julian, tenderly peeling shrimp for her, a small, intimate gesture amplified and weaponized. Her caption, dripping with smugness, "Ha ha ha, and this is the man some other girl pines for." The triumphant emoji, a final, digital flourish of victory. My world imploded in that moment. I genuinely thought I might die, that my heart would simply cease to function. But somehow I survived. And shortly after, I booked a solo trip to Morocco. Traversing the vast expanse of the Sahara, I almost surrendered to its embrace, tempted to bury myself in the endless, rust-colored dunes, to let the desert swallow my grief whole. But I came back. I always did. I returned to the motions of my previous life. Normal sleep patterns, polite social engagements, professional competence. Occasionally, someone would mention Julian's name, and I could offer a detached smile, a dismissive shrug, as if he were a character in a long-forgotten play. Until Julian and Isabel broke up. Again. Their personalities, I realized with a detached clarity, were simply not compatible for the long haul. One too detached, too emotionally guarded. The other too proud, too uncompromising. Any friction, any disagreement would escalate into a battle of wills, neither willing to yield, to bend, to compromise. Like the lyrics of that Lin Yojia song echoed in my mind. You and she didn't work out as wished. Within half a year, rifts began to appear. My love remained unchanged. Even I admire myself for it. So, 28 days after their inevitable split, I sent Julian a message. A casual, almost nonchalant invitation. I asked if he wanted to grab a drink. He came, and just like that, we were back together. The reunion detonated a bomb in my social circle. Maya, incandescent with fury, pointed a finger at me, her voice shaking with disbelief. She accused me. of being delusional, pleaded with me to regain my senses, threatening to sever our friendship in a desperate attempt to shock me back to reality. But I was beyond reason, beyond logic. I was calm, self-possessed, yet utterly enslaved by my own heart. I watched detached as Maya pounded her fist against her chest, her face contorted with anguish. "Maya," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "If I could, I would rip this heart out with a knife." "I know it's not worth it," I continued, tears welling again, blurring my vision. "But I can't control it, Maya. I honestly can't. I know I've debased myself, dragged my dignity through the mud," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "But when he came back, when he was here, beside me again, I was genuinely happy, Maya. Truly happy." It was only when Maya gently dabbed at my face with a tissue that I realized I was weeping again, tears silently streaming down my cheeks. Who wouldn't want to be strong, resolute, invulnerable? Who wouldn't want to be the one holding all the cards in love, gazing down with detached amusement at the honest vulnerability of another's heart? Who would willingly choose to have their own heart repeatedly trampled, only to then retrieve it from the dust, offer it up again, begging for further desecration? I wouldn't. But I had no choice. I was utterly powerless. Any sliver of a chance to keep him in my orbit, and I'd seize it, regardless of the cost to my pride, to my sanity. As long as my heart kept beating, I was helpless against its dictates. But what I hadn't anticipated was the day when my feelings for Julian would cease to exist, even before my heart stopped beating. I was adrift, lost in a labyrinth of my own emotions. I couldn't pinpoint the precise moment when my love for him had evaporated. In recent years, he had, by all accounts, been good to me. Even Maya, occasionally, would concede, a grudging admission laced with lingering skepticism. "Well, you weathered the storm, didn't you? Look at Julian now. He's practically the perfect catch. Rich, handsome, doesn't seem interested in other women. Maybe your luck finally turned." I'd just smile, a thin, noncommittal curve of my lips, and say nothing. Initially, I dismissed it as a temporary lull, a romantic plateau. A phase brought on by stress, by fluctuating hormones. It would pass. I could see Julian's subtle efforts, his uncharacteristic attempts at tenderness, his remarkable restraint with his temper. Perhaps, Isabel aside, he'd never bent so far for anyone. But the mere sight of him now often triggered a low-grade irritation, a simmering unease. This sensation persisted, weeks turning into months. A flicker of sympathy, a softening of my icy resolve, occurred during a bout of flu. I was feverish, weak, adrift in a haze of illness. Half-conscious. I became aware of a profound silence in the apartment. Stumbling out of bed, leaning heavily against the wall to combat the dizziness, I made my way to the kitchen, intending to get water. There, I found him. Julian, in the kitchen, hunched over a pot on the stove, stirring something. His tall frame was slightly bent, his attention entirely focused on a ceramic pot. I heard him murmur, almost to himself, "Simmer gently for 30 minutes. I drank some water, retreated silently back to the bedroom, unnoticed. Later, I was vaguely aware of him waking me, his voice soft. On the nightstand, a familiar white takeout container, congee from my favorite place. I ate in silence, not asking questions. Afterwards, as he was clearing away the empty container, he fumbled, a soft hiss escaping his lips. I looked up immediately, concern flickering. "What's wrong?" He hesitated, then, with a hint of vulnerability, held out his hand. A small, angry blister gleamed on the back of his hand. A burn. "I was trying to make you soup. From scratch," he mumbled, almost defensively. "And the soup?" I asked gently. He paused, a barely perceptible beat. "It wasn't edible," he admitted, a touch of sheepishness in his tone. I threw it away. It was a performance, I knew. A calculated attempt at vulnerability. This was the man who had once fractured his hand in a brawl defending Isabel's honor, who had endured the pain in stoic silence. A minor burn was hardly worth mentioning. And yet, a strange tenderness softened my resolve. Instinct overriding thought, I reached out, took his hand, and gently blew on the blister. "Did you put ointment on it?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. His hand, in mine, went rigid, as if electrocuted. Before I could register his reaction, he pulled me into a fierce embrace, his arms tightening. around me, crushing me against his chest. His chin rested on the crown of my head, his hold possessive, almost desperate. His grip was almost painful, bones pressing against bones, but I remained still, letting him hold me. After a long, suspended moment, I heard his voice. Low, almost a whisper, as if afraid of shattering something fragile. "Serafina," he murmured, his breath warm against my hair. "Just stay like this. Don't become someone I don't recognize." I remained silent, offering no reassurance, no promise. We seemed, superficially, to revert to our old patterns. I, adept at masking my true emotions, he, clinging to a semblance of normalcy. But in the quiet spaces between us, in the unspoken words and averted gazes, I was lost. Was this love rekindled, or merely habit reasserted? Or was I simply waiting, unconsciously, for the inevitable breaking point, the final rupture? That breaking point I hadn't anticipated would arrive so swiftly, so unexpectedly. After the second quarter projects wrapped up, the team planned a celebratory dinner, a chance to finally exhale. Before leaving the office, I sent Julian a casual text. Lately, on his days off, he'd often come to pick me up after work. The reply was almost instantaneous. "Okay, waiting for you at home." I glanced at the message, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. Dinner stretched late, nearly 11. Our team, large and boisterous, had booked a private room. Leaving the room, weaving through the crowded restaurant lobby, my gaze flickered, catching on a familiar figure. Isabel. Isabel had always been my personal specter, my recurring nightmare. Not necessarily exceptionally talented or beautiful, but her presence alone had the power to dismantle my carefully constructed defenses, to trigger a deep-seated insecurity. I'd instinctively shrink, feel inadequate, a psychological scar from wounds inflicted long ago, in the vulnerable years of adolescence. My breath hitched, a momentary constriction in my chest. The restaurant's chandeliers blazed overhead, illuminating her face. She was radiant, laughing, her expression a mixture of familiarity and something more intimate. My gaze drifted to the man seated opposite her. My familiarity with Julian was so profound, so deeply ingrained, that I could almost sense his presence in the same room, even without seeing him. A mere whiff of his cologne, the cadence of his laugh, the subtle shift in air pressure, all would register, even from a distance. A glimpse of his silhouette, the set of his shoulders, the way he tilted his head, instantly recognizable. Hours earlier, he had texted, "Waiting for you at home." The shock, the initial jolt of betrayal, was fleeting. Understanding flooded in, washing over me, bringing with it an unexpected clarity. All the simmering emotions, the confused anxieties, the lingering doubts, dissolved in an instant, leaving behind a strange, almost clinical detachment. Isabel looked up, her eyes meeting mine. A flicker of surprise, then a composed smile, a polite nod of recognition. I returned the smile, a carefully calibrated expression of polite acknowledgement. And then, I walked towards them. Julian's face drained of color, a sudden pallor replacing his usual tanned complexion. He looked at me, his eyes wide, almost pleading. His words were instinctive, defensive. "It's not what it looks like, Sarah. I didn't lie to you." I spoke calmly, my voice even. "Old friends catching up? What's wrong with that? Miss Isabel is back in town. It's only right for you to play host." His expression was unreadable, a mixture of confusion and suspicion. He seemed genuinely taken aback by my reaction. His gaze was searching, almost accusatory. I offered another small, placid smile. "Do you have the keys to the apartment?" I asked, my tone casual. "I forgot mine." He started to rise, instinctively reaching for his jacket draped over the back of his chair. "I'll come with you." I shook my head. "Don't be ridiculous. You can't abandon your dinner guests mid-meal. You two go ahead. I'll head home." I have no idea how convincing my performance was, how composed, how utterly detached I appeared. It was surreal. Isabel, the woman, whose name alone had once been enough to send me spiraling into insecurity, now, seeing her across from Julian, dining with him, evoked nothing, absolutely nothing. An inner stillness descended, a profound quietude. I went home, took a long, hot shower, and drifted into sleep. I couldn't even recall the moment consciousness slipped away. I woke in the dead of night. A dark shape on the living room sofa, a faint red glow flickering in the darkness, a cigarette The apartment was thick with smoke, acrid and suffocating. I coughed. A sharp, involuntary sound that echoed in the silence. Flipping on the light, I saw him, slumped on the sofa, shrouded in smoke. I startled him. "Why aren't you in bed?" I asked, my voice flat. He didn't answer immediately. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching him. He stubbed out the cigarette, the ember dying in the ashtray. Then he spoke, his voice low, strained. "Isabel and I. There's nothing between us. After you texted, she called. I didn't answer. Then she said she's moving back to the States. This was her last time back. She just wanted to say goodbye." I nodded slowly. "Okay, sure. I understand." I walked to the sliding glass doors leading to the balcony, opening them wide, letting the cool night air flood in, diluting the stale smoke. Turning back to him, I asked, "Why haven't you showered yet?" He ignored my question, continuing his strained explanation. "I was terrified you'd misunderstand. I rushed back here, practically drove like a maniac, trying to figure out how to explain, especially when the apartment was dark. I thought you'd left. But then I opened the bedroom door and you were asleep." "You were sleeping so soundly," he continued, his gaze fixed on me, his handsome features etched with a weary desperation, his eyes rimmed with red. "You didn't even stir." When I opened the door, he looked at me, his voice low, each word weighted with a strange, almost mournful finality. In that moment, I almost wished you had left. I paused, absorbing his words, the strange, unsettling vulnerability in his confession. Then I offered a quiet, almost apologetic explanation. "I'm sorry. I was just really tired tonight." "Do you even care about me anymore?" he interrupted, his voice suddenly sharper, more urgent. A direct, almost desperate plea. "Do you still care?" "Have you noticed?" he continued, his voice laced with a raw vulnerability I rarely witnessed. "You haven't initiated anything with me in months. You don't nag me about smoking anymore. You don't try to humor me. You don't even instinctively curl up against me in bed anymore, even when I crank the AC down. Have you even noticed I haven't smoked in 3 months?" I was speechless, caught off guard by the torrent of his confession, the raw honesty in his voice. He was right. I couldn't refute any of it. I hadn't noticed. Or perhaps I had, but simply hadn't registered the significance, hadn't connected the dots. I hadn't fallen for someone else. He hadn't changed, not fundamentally. But I had. Something within me had shifted, subtly, irrevocably. I simply didn't love him anymore. He watched my silence, his expression hardening, morphing into a familiar impatience. He snatched a cigarette from the pack on the coffee table, his movements jerky, agitated. Lighting it, he inhaled deeply, the smoke momentarily obscuring his features. Through the swirling haze, he asked, his voice rough, laced with a self-destructive edge, "What do you want, Serafina? Do you want to break up?" I hesitated, the question hanging heavy in the smoke-filled air. Then, finally, I met his gaze, my voice quiet but steady. "Yes," I said. "I want to break up." The words, spoken aloud for the first time, felt both terrifying and liberating. The lit cigarette slipped from his fingers, falling onto the table, unnoticed. He stood abruptly, his movements explosive, and kicked the coffee table with brutal force. The heavy marble table skidded sideways, a jarring screech against the polished floor. His eyes were bloodshot, raw with emotion. He roared, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. "Fine. Break up then. Do you think I can't live without you?" Then he slammed the door, a deafening crash that reverberated through the apartment, shaking the walls. He was gone. Vanished into the night, presumably to spend the night stewing in his anger in his car. I stood rooted to the spot for a full hour, the silence amplifying the echo of his rage. Then, with a newfound sense of purpose, I began to pack my belongings. As dawn painted the sky with the first streaks of light, I left the apartment, my suitcase in hand, and went to Maya's. Maya, still simmering with protective anger, greeted me at the door, her voice sharp. "Tell me," she demanded, her eyes narrowed. "Did that son of a bitch hurt you again?" Exhausted, having barely slept, I shook my head wearily. "Maya," I said, my voice soft, "it was my decision." The words, rehearsed silently in my mind countless times in recent weeks, now hung in the air, finally spoken aloud. Relief, a strange, unexpected lightness, washed over me. It felt like Finally embracing that younger, heartbroken version of myself, the one who had desperately buried her despair in the red dunes of the Sahara, nearly suffocating under the weight of betrayal. I don't love him anymore, Maya, I confessed, the words barely a whisper. I just don't love him. Maya stared at me, speechless, her mouth agape, her expression a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. She looked at me as if seeing a stranger for the first time. I returned to the Sahara. Standing atop the vast, undulating dunes, the endless expanse of sand stretching to the horizon, my phone rang. It was Maya. Her voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. He's here, she mumbled. Julian. He says he's here to bring you back. He looks terrible, Serafina. Lost weight, pale. Kind of pathetic, actually. But her tone shifted abruptly, regaining its usual protective edge. I told him to get lost. When are you coming back? Then, a final, lingering note of disbelief. This is really it, isn't it? You two are really done this time? No going back. I laughed softly, a genuine laugh, the sound carried away by the desert wind. I didn't reply. But Maya, bless her persistent nature, betrayed my unspoken wish for solitude. When I landed back home, stepping off the plane, Julian was there. He had lost weight, Maya was right. But he seemed calmer, more grounded. He smiled, a tentative, almost shy smile, a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. I came to take you home, he said softly. I didn't argue, didn't engage in any dramatic pronouncements of independence. I got into the car, then turned to him, my voice quiet but firm. Thank you, Julian. But just take me to Maya's, please. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost pleading. I was wrong. Okay, I was wrong. Such a proud man, I doubted he'd ever uttered those words to anyone before. I was really wrong, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. After you left, the apartment was empty. Hollow. Without you. I couldn't stand being there for a minute. He inhaled deeply, a shuddering breath, closing his eyes briefly, his eyelids flushed. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, velvet box, offering it to me. Marry me, Serafina, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Disbelief, a wave of pure, unadulterated shock, washed over me. Julian, the man who embodied the very essence of freedom, of untethered existence, the man who had always seemed allergic to commitment, was proposing. Even in the most ardent, love-blind days of our past, I had never dared to dream of this. But beyond the initial shock, there was nothing. No surge of joy, no flutter of anticipation, no flicker of hope. Just a profound emptiness. I had spent years trying to decipher my own feelings for Julian, especially. In recent months, trying to understand why the intensity of my love had waned so inexplicably. Why, after years of desperate longing, of unwavering devotion, I suddenly felt nothing. It was only when I returned to the Sahara, to the place where I had once sought solace in the face of heartbreak, that the answer finally crystallized. I wasn't a magnanimous person. Time, in its relentless flow, hadn't erased the memory of those devastating wounds from 4 years ago. The desperate pleas, the humiliating bargains, the relentless compromises I had made, the utter erosion of my self-respect. Those self-destructive thoughts, the moments of utter despair when I'd contemplated simply ceasing to exist, those memories, those raw, unhealed wounds, had festered beneath the surface for the past 4 years, slowly poisoning our fragile reconciliation. The truth, stark and undeniable, was that I had never truly forgotten the pain. My love, in the relentless tide of memory, had gradually faded, leaving behind only Serafina. Serafina, reclaiming the fragments of her shattered self-esteem, piecing together the remnants of her self-worth. This woman, this long-suffering, emotionally resilient woman had finally, belatedly, understood a fundamental truth. She needed to love herself first. Pushing Julian's ring box back towards him, I felt an astonishing calm, a serene certainty. I knew, with unwavering conviction, that I wouldn't regret this decision. I looked at Julian, my gaze steady, my voice gentle, a mixture of regret and release. I'm sorry, Julian, I said. I don't love you anymore. He seemed to have anticipated this outcome. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then he smiled, a sad, watery smile, his eyes red-rimmed. "Not now," he murmured. "But maybe later? You don't love anyone else, do you? If we started over, completely fresh, would you give me another chance?" I gazed out at the endless stream of traffic blurring past the car window. Time, in its relentless march, had healed my wounds, had restored my self-respect, had gifted me a complete, whole Serafina. I had finally learned to approach love with a sense of equality, of mutual respect. As for the future, who could say? Leaning my head against the cool glass of the car window, I smiled, a small, enigmatic smile. Let time be the judge. The end.